Okay, recording's on. Okay, so again, thanks for everybody for showing up today. And today we're just going to discuss becoming a Dynamics developer. And these, again, are going to be my opinions, my experiences. Everybody's going to be different. So at the end, hopefully we can have an interactive conversation about what you guys have seen and experienced yourselves. Because like I said, everybody's different. So my path may not be your path, etc. So we'll start with that. Okay, so if you didn't know, my name is Mitch Milam. I'm a Dynamics CRM architect. You can reach me there at xrmcoaches.com. My Twitter is Mitch Milam, and then contact me on LinkedIn if you want as wish. That's a little tiny URL, or you can just look for my name. That works too. So future events. Next week we have a webinar called All About Notes. I had a conversation with a customer a few weeks ago about, well, where do we store notes for customers? And I thought so we had a good conversation. I said, that's a good topic for a webinar. I mean, things have progressed to the point where it's not always about notes anymore. And so I thought we would discuss the different technologies we have, the ramifications and pluses and minuses of both. If you're looking to do any JavaScript development, I have a workshop in 2 weeks. We're doing this a little bit different where we're doing it either in the morning or the evening so it doesn't interfere with your work schedule too much. And we're going to spread it out over 4 days, over 2 weeks. So that's coming up. We're going to do in 3 weeks, we're going to do a Dynamics 365 new feature overview. I've kind of waited on this because a lot of the features that were displayed in at the UG Summit in Tampa weren't actually built into the product yet. So we're far enough along that I think we can talk and have an intelligent conversation about that. Can you guys hear me? Yes, okay. Brian, I'm not sure everybody else is here. Okay. Sorry. Brian said he couldn't, no audio. So you may have to reconnect and disconnect and reconnect, Brian. Next, I asked everybody toward the end of the year about topics and that they were interested in. And Microsoft Flow was pretty much the kind of the top category. So I thought we would dig into Microsoft Flow a little bit and discuss how we can use it to move data in and out of CRM. And then finally, Dynamics 365 gave us a new business rule editor. So I thought it would be a good time to go through some of that. And then, so that will get us into February. My February is kind of up in the air right now. I'm going to be out of town for a bit, so I'm not sure of my February schedule, but I'm going to try to have this year where we're actually doing a webinar every week so I can get back to my original schedule. So that is what we're doing. So if you got any suggestions, as always, please let me know. A little bit of webinar housekeeping here. So again, as most of you have done or are doing, so ask a question. Anytime you wish. I'll try and monitor it. Sometimes I don't always see it, but if I can answer it, I will. Otherwise, we'll get back to it later. Everything that you see is being recorded. It'll be on my YouTube channel later today, and I'm going to talk about some tools and stuff. And everybody will get an email, whether you attended or not, as long as you registered. And I'll have all the links and stuff that I discussed later on in that email, so you don't have to worry about doing screenshots and things like that. So again, training roadmap is much like last year. Go to my webinar page to see the webinars, knowledge bits if you hadn't signed up as an email delivery system for tips and tricks. Learning plans I'm added to. During this presentation, the preparation for this presentation, I actually came up with a couple more learning plans that I'm going to be working on. I'll try to get those done by Monday. It depends on my personal, wife/kid work this weekend. Deep Dive Administration is in Amazon. I'm going to get the ebook up here soon. I've been in the middle of redoing my website, so I'm kind of delayed on some of my electronic stuff. And then the other books will be coming later, as well as some on-demand training that we'll be coming out with here pretty quick as well. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, just give me a shout sometime, and we can talk about what we're doing, and where we're headed. Here is my official roadmap as I drew up last year. This is my whiteboard. This is secret, so don't tell anybody. But this is where I planned out how I'm doing things. It's probably the middle of last year. So I'm working toward, this is my end goal here, just so you know. So lots of good stuff happening, and it's just, have time, I can get it done. That's all there is to it. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm going to give you a bit of background about how I got into Dynamics 365 development. What I came up with was what I call stages of a Dynamics 365 developer's life, and then the training process that I use for new people, either for customers or partners or anybody else that I work with. So again, this is just my experiences, and yours will be different, just so you know. So if it varies from what you see, then we'll talk about that when we get there, of course. So I started a long time ago with CRM version 3. I figured out last month or in November, that was 11 years ago, if you can believe that. It's really kind of hard to believe that 11 years has passed. And we're now versions 8.2 specifically. So I have installed a lot of dynamic CRM. Customizations I can't tell you about. I've written thousands and thousands of lines of JavaScript and C#. And as always, if you're in a technology business, you should get used to updating your skills every time they come out with a new release, because everything is new and different. So, keep that in mind. So during the middle of all that, what I would do is I would write blog articles when I figured something out that I hadn't seen anybody else write about. So my technique has always been, if it takes me more than 30 minutes to figure it out or to find it, because sometimes it's hard finding stuff, then I'd write an article about it, as long as it didn't interfere with either my strategic work that I was doing for my own practice or customers. As long as it was no conflict there, then I would write an article about it. I can't emphasize enough how much I want you guys to do that too. So if you don't have a blog, go out to WordPress.com and fire one up for free. That's what I would suggest. I developed free tools and customizations to enhance CRM. I created commercial products. I became an MCT, and then I was an MVP for CRM for 10 years as a result of all this work that I did in my community. And it has been an absolute blast. I cannot tell you how many cool and neat people that I've met, I've worked with, I've taught, hanging out with conferences. So again, the highlight of my career so far. So this is what I came up with this week while I was updating. This is a presentation that I presented a couple of different ways. And right in the middle of all this, I was like, there actually kind of are stages to a developer's life. So the first stage is what I call user. So you have to start off using the product. You need to know and understand how it works for the user. You need to, you can help design business processes. If you have a place that has a QA team, maybe you could get involved with that team. Be part of a change committee. If you don't know what a change committee is, that's the committee that is a interface between IT and the user community that works in conjunction with both of them to actually decide what changes will be made to the system. Not every company has that. Not every company has a QA team. But as a user, generally you start off using it just as your standard, day-to-day thing, and then from there, as you increase your knowledge, you can increase your influence as you learn more about how both the business works and how the CRM product works, so that you can actually add more value to yourself and to the business. Next stage is what I call power user. So you might be able to develop custom processes, either workflows or things like that, business process flows. Maybe you do data import export. Maybe you start doing some of the administration tasks if you don't have an administrator, or if the administrator needs some help. Maybe you're the Power BI expert. These things are what I call power user. And again, they kind of start intermixing when you get into the middle between the user and the developer side. So what I like to do is just, this is just some typical things. And again, your mileage will vary depending on what you're doing. Then we get into the customizer role, and we're going to have Outlook or PowerPoint restart on me. And part of the customizer role is creating new stuff. So we create entities and fields. We create views and forms and charts, etc. You start working with users to develop user requirements, and again, that is going to kind of fade from the power user into the customizer. And maybe you start getting into the light development by creating business rules, or maybe you go straight to JavaScript. That's the next step. So client-side developer. So with client-side, I include both JavaScript, which is development, and also the customization of the ribbon and the sitemap. So the ribbon and sitemap are codeless customizations. You just have to understand the structure of what you're doing. Although the ribbon may include code, because you're going to probably add buttons that actually connect to JavaScript functions to do magical things that you come up with. Then Microsoft has started using this term called a citizen developer, so I thought I would throw this in. And the idea behind a citizen developer is a developer who creates solutions without writing code. So in the CRM world, we have business rules, we have business process flows, we have workflows. Then if you step outside, we have Microsoft Flow. And then if you get into the actual development of applications, specifically mobile application, you can use the Power Apps. So again, those are ways that you can actually create solutions to a problem without actually having to be a coder. And a lot of what Microsoft is trying to do, if you've looked at the roadmap that we have and seeing how things are working out, you'll see that they're trying to enhance the codeless work that we can do strictly because it just makes more sense for a lot of people. The next stage is platform developer. So in almost all cases, this is using .NET, though it could be some heavy JavaScript depending on how you do it. So you may be writing plugins, custom workflow activities. Maybe you're creating a custom integration between one of your business systems, your internal business systems, and CRM/Dynamics 365. So this is actually what I consider to be the last level. And to be quite honest, this is not a requirement. Many people can stop at either the client-side customizations and be perfectly happy, functional, and valuable. Other people want to go into the codeless in stage 5, but doing .NET development is a different skill set, and not everybody has that skill set, and not everybody wants that skill set. So just keep that in mind. That's why this is at the very end. So if you're a consultant, you have to have all of these. If you're working in a day-to-day corporate environment where you're just trying to get things done and trying to drive yourself or your spouse crazy, then you probably won't get into this. But you might. Again, it really depends on how deep you want to get into the CRM platform. So let's talk about the process that people generally go through for developer training. Step 1 is absolutely know and understand Dynamics 365 or Dynamics CRM, depending on your version. It is absolutely impossible to develop against a product you do not know. Over the years, I have taught a handful of classes where the developers had zero or almost zero knowledge of CRM, and they were absolutely unmitigated disasters, every one of them. Strictly because when you start talking about things that the developer has no concept of, like what an entity is, what an attribute is, or field, as they call it, depending where you look, they don't know where things are, they don't know what they're called, they don't know the terminology, things like that. It just doesn't work. And I've warned people up front this is going to be bad, and it turns out to be bad. So again, to be working with a product, you need to understand the product. And if you don't understand the product and you approach things from a developer level, you will also write or create solutions that do not take into account probably or possibly built-in functionality. Okay, so I've seen it a couple places where someone was given developer training and not really administration/customizer training. So their first take on it was go develop something when it actually already was in the product. They just didn't know it because they didn't know the product. Okay, so this is the very, very important rule that I can't emphasize enough. So part of the knowing understanding is how the user interface works and navigation. Every version of CRM is slightly different. The biggest jump from 2011 to 2013 set us all back a bit. 2015 SP1 or whatever it was fixed a bunch of things. 16 has gotten better. Dynamics 365 is even a little bit more friendly. You need to understand the terminology. When I say a view, what do I mean? A view, is that a SQL view? No, it's not. It's a view with a view of data as a grid. Where are the customization points? So we mentioned some of them already. We've got JavaScript. We've got forms we can create. We can create views and charts. We can do .NET. We can create workflows. You need to know all these things. And then finally, where do I know to go to get help? Part of the thing that I see a lot of places do, and I don't really have an explanation for it, but they don't evidently know of the internet. because I will mention stuff to them. I've taught classes before, and I'm like, well, you know about this tool. I'm like, they're like, no. I'm like, well, do you not do any development at all? Because, they don't understand that there are things out there to help them, and either they couldn't find it or they didn't look hard enough. And so they were doing things the hard way, quite honestly. Be aware of the version differences. So Microsoft is really good about telling us what they've added to the system, but they don't do a very good job sometimes of telling us what they changed, and they show up in very, very strange places. So what will happen is they will add a small feature internally somewhere, and it's not really truly documented a lot of places, or it might be documented, but you just haven't seen it, and all of a sudden, the way that CRM works is not the way it works anymore. It worked that way one time, and then they either fixed the functionality or they corrected the functionality, and then next thing you know, it doesn't work. And I cannot tell you how many times I've been embarrassed either on stage or in front of a class saying, well, it works like this, and then somebody doesn't, like, well, it doesn't work like that. I'm like, sure it does. Like, no, it doesn't. And so you get an argument, and finally you look at what they're doing, and you're like, oh, it doesn't work like that. And all it was it worked like that for 4 versions or 5 versions, and then they fixed it. And it didn't work like that anymore, but, I didn't get the memo. So I'm under a mindset that this is how it works. Step 2 is know and understand the Dynamics CRM SDK. There is a month of reading and deciphering and playing around with all the things in there. So if I showed you my desktop, I actually have 2 of the help files. I have, I think, the Dynamics 365 and the Dynamics CRM 2016 help files open as we speak, strictly because I look at them all the time. So there's lots of documentation. There's tools that that either are good to use or that we have to use depending on the situation. There's tons of sample code and other resources within that. One of the things I didn't mention here is I keep all of my SDKs. So if you look at my main work folder, I probably have 10 or 15 folders with each version. They used to update it every quarter, and now I think they've just gone back since CRM went to a biannual release cycle. So every 6 months they'll release CRM, they'll update the SDK as well. So I keep individual versions. So like we went from 8.0, which is 2016, to 8.1 to 8.2, which is Dynamics 365. I keep all those versions because sometimes they accidentally introduce bugs, but more importantly, what they will do is they will make a change to the documentation or to the sample code, and then next thing you know, a piece of code that was really cool is not there anymore. So I always keep multiple versions of everything just to be safe. You can always download the last major release of the SDK for all of the versions, and I'll include that with the links that I have. So you can get it from 2011 all the way through Dynamics 365. You can get the last release that they had. So that's never a problem there. But sometimes the minor releases are good to have as well. When you start developing custom solutions, and this could be anything, learn the extension model. So in other words, you need to know when you can configure something, you can customize something, or you have to develop something. And I cannot emphasize that enough. And quite honestly, I think that's going to be the title of one of my new webinars coming up in late February or March, is to know the difference between these things. So a lot of the work that we can do these days is pure configuration. Then we get into the customization layer with either the custom entities, custom fields, JavaScript, etc. And then finally, when we start doing .NET and plugins and things like that, that's true development there. And then the JavaScript is to a point as well. The way that you generally do stuff is, and the thing I really love about Dynamics CRM is I have never run into an issue that I could not solve in one way or the other. Most of the time, there are multiple options available to solve any particular problem. You just have to find the option that fits best given the requirements and the resources you have available. Okay, so just keep that in mind. And the final thing is practice, practice, practice. So, that's just one of the things. The more you do it, the better you'll get. That's anything in life, and this is no different. So the things you do today are not going to be the things you did last week or last month or last year. So hopefully you get better as time goes on. You learn new things. You learn how to be better at what you're doing, and you increase your value to yourself and to your company. Step 3 is learning the business. Here's my favorite quote from the greatest philosopher of the 21st century, Yogi Berra. We're lost, but we're making good time. Who has ever worked at an organization like that? Anybody? I hear a bunch of people not telling me the truth. Either that, my mic has stopped working. So before you can automate anything or customize anything, you have to know where and what you can do. Part of that is understanding the business. So you have to know how the business works before you can apply anything technology related to it. Which brings me to rule number 3, technology does not solve process issues. If you automate a bad process, what you have is a really fast bad process. So applying technology to things does not solve the issue. You have to solve the issue before that technology application takes place. So this should be common sense, but it's not a lot. So, generally the way I found it, if something just feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And that's just not to do with development. That's just about anything in life that I found. So a lot of times when you're working with anything technology related, and you see, okay, we're going to do this process. If it looks complicated or it seems like it's complicated, it probably is complicated. And the more complicated it is, the worse it gets. I've got a couple customers right now, and their architecture diagrams, I quite honestly, I can't believe people can actually show that to other people and think it's a good idea. Step 4 is learn the solutions model. We're talking about the Dynamics CRM solutions model. So, do you use managed versus unmanaged? There's a huge kind of, I think, difference in thought about how you should do one versus the other. So a lot of organizations use unmanaged only to move their customizations from dev to test to production. Some of them will go to managed. Later versions of CRM 2016 and later have a more refined update process so that we can actually distribute patches using the managed solutions. So it really kind of depends. The biggest thing is once you go managed, you can't go back. So I wrote an article the other day about that kind of part of that process where one of the things you do is when you create a managed solution is always create an unmanaged solution at exactly the same time. So export one, then export the other so you have a copy. And maintain a copy. If you have consultants working for you, make sure you get a copy of the unmanaged solution. Because in this case, what happened is the customer and the consultant, I don't know what happened exactly. I guess they had a falling out. Anyway, long story short, they lost or did not have the unmanaged version of the solution, and it was on a trial, and they didn't know what to do. So we luckily were able to get around that and get the trial turned back on so they could export it out, but that was pretty scary there for a little bit. So again, learn the solution update process, whatever works for you in your organization, and then have a pretty defined process for moving from development to test to production, assuming that you have those. Not everybody does. A lot of people just have to do stuff in production because they only have one environment. If you're on CRM Online and you have 25 users or more, you have access to a sandbox instance. That's great to work with. So depending on the situation, just learn the most proper process that you can follow development-wise that you can. And again, this is going to be probably another webinar here in the future. So then we get into the client aspect of CRM. So understand the JavaScript program model, what attributes methods we have, what control method is, working with tabs and sections, and everything in between. There's a lot of stuff that is built into the object model now. And like I said, I've got a workshop in a couple of weeks where we're going to be talking about that, and there's going to be a lot of homework and stuff because of just the time frame, the commitments. But you could spend a solid week exploring all of the things that you can do with JavaScript within CRM and probably still not be complete. So just keep that in mind. So it's a pretty robust model now. It lets you do a lot of really cool things. So just fire up a trial instance of CRM Online and just play with stuff if you don't have a test environment. Learn how to modify the Dynamics CRM user experience. So this mainly means the sitemap and the ribbon. So there are free tools out there that allow us to work with both. But the main thing is you have to understand the underlying concepts behind both the sitemap and the ribbon, how they're put together, the different components, the properties of those components. So you have to understand all these things for you to modify the stuff. Now, the Dynamics 365 has a sitemap editor built into it that you can use for certain things. But there are other tools out there, again, that are free that will allow you to do stuff. So, again, the idea of customizing the sitemap and the ribbon is to present to the user an interface that makes sense to them. So, in other words, you're removing stuff that doesn't make any sense, that is totally irrelevant to the user's workload. And if you can do that, you will actually make the user, believe it or not, less stressed out and more productive, because they just don't have to look at things that they don't use. Okay. And again, learning the .NET programming model. If you need to, you don't always have to. Again, this is kind of the very, very last step through this journey, unless you're a consultant where you need to learn pretty much everything. Learn the necessary components. So there's assemblies within CRM, within the SDK that you use for .NET development. The CRUD model, so create, read, update, delete. All the SDK stuff, how you do that, how you query for data, how you deploy your code. If you're writing plugins, you need to understand the plugin registration tool. If you're writing custom workflow activities, you need to know how they interact with the designer, etc., like that. Which brings us to plugins. So, in all honesty, by the time you get to writing a plugin, you're pretty much at the end of a road. It's been my experience. So everything else that you've tried to do has not worked. So a lot of times you can use JavaScript for stuff. You can use business rules in many cases. You can use just standard workflow stuff. So by the time you get to writing a plugin, the probability exists that you've exhausted all the other methods, because the main thing to remember of any piece of code you write is a piece of code you have to maintain. That may not sound like a big deal, but it is. So if you write code, you have to maintain that code. And then what happens is, if you don't maintain it and things change, you always have a maintenance point for testing any kind of upgrade that we do. You have to make sure that all your code still works the same as it did before. So same goes with custom workflow activities. You have to understand the plugin registration tool. You have to understand how we do stuff with the sandbox. That's not the sandbox instance, but the sandbox that the custom workflow activities and the plugins have to run in some cases. And finally, we get into codeless development. So again, this is Microsoft Flow and Power Apps. So we'll have a Power Apps webinar here probably in March. Again, Flow is in 3 weeks, I think, 4 weeks. And then we're just kind of covered those two. So the idea of Flow is to basically connect something to something. So if you guys have ever heard of if this then that, the web service, that's what Flow is. It's the Microsoft version of that. So it takes an action that starts something off, and then it will take data from that action and then do something else with it. I did a test one day of taking a Twitter feed that used my hashtag for XRM coaches and had it actually create a lead within CRM. And that took me a little bit of time to do, but not much. And again, there's no code. It's all drag and drop configuration, and you're done. Power Apps is close to the same way. It allows you to create mobile apps without knowing how to create a mobile app. And let me tell you, creating mobile apps is a pain in the butt, and a lot of other parts too. So the main idea here is it allows you to design a full interface from menu to view of data to record of data, and add other functionality that's platform specific, such as actually the camera and other pieces of things like that, all without writing code. So it's all drag and drop. You create it in a designer, it's either on the web or on your desktop. Then you deploy it to the Power Apps library, and you can download that to your phone, and the users can get it, and as far as they know, they're running your app. So that's always a cool thing. So again, I haven't seen many people use a lot of these things. Flow is being used more, I think, than Power Apps. Power Apps still has a few rough edges to it, but it's got a lot of potential. And like I said, it saves you all the grunt work of doing mobile apps and having to understand the platform itself. Plus, you create it once and it runs on just about anything from desktop to phone to tablet. So in review, understand Dynamics CRM, know the SDK, learn the business. Learn the solutions model, JavaScript programming model, the user experience modifications, the .NET programming model, plugins and custom workflow activities, and finally codeless development. And again, everybody's going to be different. You may not need all of these. You may only need some of these things. Probably right in the middle, everything would kind of shut off again before you get to the .NET is where most people, probably 70% of you, will actually stop, and that's perfectly fine. So some tools and resources, and again, this will be in the email that follows up here. So XRM Toolbox has just got a ton of cool stuff in it. CRMS Builder for building JavaScript queries. Snapshot is a documentation tool I sell for documenting your organization. Ribbon Workbench for working on the ribbon. Sitemap Editor is to modify the sitemap. And then there's a collection of workflow utilities from various people, various MVPs that are open source that you can get the source code to and modify to your heart's content, and just add things to your workflow engine that you don't normally have. So keep in mind, there is a lot to know and understand. When I started with CRM version 3, again, this was 11 years ago, it honestly took me about a year to be comfortable with knowing what I was doing. And I still didn't know everything. It took me a year to understand, here's where all the pieces were, here's how you did those pieces, here's how they interacted, here's how I created applications that work with them. It took about a year. And that was a very, very simple system. Today it's 100 times more complicated probably. So invest in yourself either by taking classes or attending webinars like this. All my webinars go up on my YouTube channel. You can watch those. Sign up for my knowledge bits. There's tons of blogs out there that have really great content. There's other training companies out there that offer either free or paid training. But nothing is going to beat putting in the time and practicing. Okay. But the biggest thing is, don't be overwhelmed. Like I said, there is a lot to know, so don't try to learn everything at once, because how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So let's open up for questions. So if you want to, just raise your hand on the thing, and I can open your mic up. Now, I can barely see my thing there, so let me move this over here. Habibi, you want to ask a question? Habib, are you on? Or just type it out. Let's see, who else? Anybody? Nobody? Oh, okay. You're Glenn. Okay, Glenn, what's your question?
Yeah, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, first of all, thanks. I
Sure.
appreciate this. I'm interested in trying to find some ways of developing like alerts or notifications or things like that within CRM. That the kind of the traditional model of, if something happens, a user is alerted through an email. Everybody's email box is overflowing. So I'm
Right.
looking at different ways of, providing alerts for people. What's new is certainly helpful, but I'm just curious, have you thought about this? Or there maybe some tools or some things that I just haven't seen that are out there? I'm interested in, not just within CRM itself, but also with, integrations with Office 365 and with Windows 10,
Okay.
for that matter. What are just some new ways of alerting people that things are happening within CRM? Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. So the probably first thing would be a workflow. Now, you can generate emails and things like that, so that is going to fill up the inbox. There's just no way around that. I think most things would do that. You can probably use Microsoft Flow to have other things, and the way notifications should work, they don't always work. How they should work is it should be a scale up. So the way that the fire department here in the U.S. works is they have a fire alarm go off. And then if they need help, they fire another alarm off. And then they'll fire another alarm off. And what they do is they send everybody that they might know or need, and they sit there. And if they don't need them, they send them home, because it's easier to activate something that's already existing than it is to wait for them to get there. So you kind of need to take the same approach when you're doing notifications. You don't want to overwhelm the user with text messages, but there are certain situations where it warrants a text message, or maybe just a plain email or something else. Now within CRM, we can put notifications on a record so that when the record is opened, there's a notification. But there's nothing on the user interface itself. Like probably most of you seen when you log into CRM, it will pop up that thing at the top, the yellow or green bar, depending on the version, that says, "Hey, would you like to try out the Interactive Service Hub?" We don't have that capability yet. It would be great if we did, but we don't. So things like that have to be taken into account. But probably, communications messages are email, text message, maybe phone call, but probably email is going to be your most common denominator. Okay. Let's see. Dave Sadler says you can use Flow to add that item to Wunderlist. That is true. You can add Flow to actually do a text message, if I'm not mistaken, too. So we'll probably try to play with that. Some of the marketing things like Click Dimensions, if you have an account with like Twilio, which is the commercial system, you can actually send a tweet via that using one of their processes. Let's see. Randall asks, how often have you needed to develop HTML pages as web resources for a completely custom function? Do you have something like Angular to do this? So, man, that's a tough question. This is where you get into the really heavy development. And Angular.js is a web framework. Another one is called Bootstrap. I've seen both being used within CRM. So basically what happens is they're JavaScript libraries that you include as web resources, and then you create an HTML web resource that is the web page, and then the two interact together. And it works good if you know what those are, but those are not what normal CRM developers face, because it's very complicated, and it unfortunately with Angular it changes a lot. Like the difference between Angular 1 and 2 is evidently night and day. So you've got little systems like that are going to cause you problems. And so basically all it is a learning curve. It's not that you can't do it, or not you can't learn it, but the learning curve is something. I've personally used Kendo UI from Telerik to actually do stuff. So there are a lot of examples out there. If you just do a quick Googling around to find examples of using either Bootstrap or Angular or Kendo within CRM. So it really depends on the functionality. But remember, it's going to be a huge maintenance point, and it's fine if you do it, but what happens if you leave and somebody has to take over? That's the big problem. So we call that technological debt, and that's a pretty heavy debt, quite honestly. But if you're happy doing it, then that's fine. So again, it depends on the situation. Munir says, could you set up some kind of landing page that polls CRM and query statuses? Absolutely. So if you didn't know it, you can add your own web pages within CRM that are full size. So what you do is you actually modify the sitemap, where you click on something or make it the default page, and what it is just a web page that you own, that's a web resource that you control. So you are an update. This would be a perfect thing of either Kendo or Angular or something like that. So you could give somebody a personal dashboard to do stuff. Again, it depends on the amount of work you want to do. Let's see. Neil says, suggestion, could you try a task with a due date? If you integrate it with Outlook, that would be a pop-up notification. That's 100% true. So that's a great idea, Neil. Yeah, so if you put a due date on a task and you have the Outlook app or the Outlook client installed, it will actually pop up your standard Outlook reminder saying, hey, you got a task due. So that's a notification. So that would work. Oh, and Dave has basically given me some unsupported code to tell everybody about, which that does work, Dave, but that will cause a problem, Dave. let's see. Default XRM Service Toolkit. Yeah, XRM Service Toolkit is one of those things that one of those JavaScript things that we use. Okay. What else? Anybody else have their hand raised? Habib, do you still have a question? Guess not. Okay. Is there anything else? Let's see. Okay, I got a couple more. Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for attending today.